Hey everyone, I'm Scott Cunningham, aka Scott C Business. Today we're here with Andreas Antonopoulos, if that's how you say it correctly.
More or less, good enough.
Okay, perfect. I'm sure a lot of you know him. He's a best-selling author, speaker, educator. He's one of the most well-known blockchain Bitcoin experts, and he's done tons of talks. He's all over the place. We've seen him at so many conferences, and really leading the space right now. I'm here on behalf of BeInCrypto. And if you're interested in what they're up to, make sure to go and check out their Telegram, BeInCrypto community. So can we just quickly start off? How did you get started in blockchain and Bitcoin and cryptocurrency originally?
So my background is as a computer scientist. I have a master's degree in distributed systems networks. And I focused on information security. So as you can imagine, I was already primed. Like this is my professional background and was for 25 years before Bitcoin appeared on the scene. I missed the first few years, was paying attention to other things. And then in 2011 or 2012, an article caught my eye, something about Bitcoin and gambling. And I completely dismissed it. And then a few months later, or maybe 6 months later, I saw another article again about Bitcoin. And this time it had a link to the Bitcoin white paper, which I clicked on and started reading and derailed my life completely. Blew my mind, pushed all of the buttons of my professional experience. I immediately realized, oh, okay, this is not what I thought it was. It is much more sophisticated. This is something really novel and really revolutionary. I have so many questions. And then I just went straight down the rabbit hole. I literally dropped all of my clients. I was doing freelance consulting at the time, and switched my focus entirely to Bitcoin and started working full-time on Bitcoin that day.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. And you're famously known for the Bitcoin diet, so to speak, where you we're basically studying it for 18 hours a day and you lost 26 pounds.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, that's just intense passion for
Not
Bitcoin.
recommended. Not recommended.
Yeah.
It's part of my personality. It's intense passion for technology and things that I find to be elegantly designed. There's something about I look at a technology and I can see elegance in how it works. And this has happened to me many times through my life. You know, the first time I got a computer, the first time I got a modem, the first time I used the web, the first time I used the Linux operating system. Several times in my life, I've had these moments of epiphany which have overwhelmed me. With enthusiasm and passion and intrigue and curiosity, and I've just dove in. The only difference is that by the time this happened to me with Bitcoin, I had also professional experience and the self-confidence to know that no matter how many people tell me that I'm wrong or I'm seeing things that aren't there, as people told me when I said, you know, the internet's going to change our lives. One day we'll be doing X, Y, Z. By the time Bitcoin happened, I had the confidence to know and trust my instincts and my professional experience. And so I could just really focus without really paying attention to everybody who told me this was crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. So, I mean, speeding up to today, how do you feel that the COVID situation is affecting the space right now?
I mean, I can't really draw any conclusions about how COVID is affecting the space. I mean, obviously, the broader economic impact of COVID, but also the impact of a profoundly sick economy that, you know, we walked into COVID with a profoundly sick economy, and COVID was just the straw that broke the camel's back, to say. It's not the primary reason we have these economic problems. We're well overdue for a recession, but the broader economic recession is affecting Bitcoin as well and all other parts of this ecosystem, because investment and assets are drying up as people are hoarding cash and trying to get out of risk. In fact, the first impact of Bitcoin was a drop in its value. We are going to see probably a pullout of a lot of investments. A lot of startups are going to find it very, very hard to keep their runway and not go down. There's going to be a clearing out of the space, which, from my perspective, I think that's healthy. We're not going to see a bailout in Bitcoin. What we're going to see in Bitcoin and the surrounding ecosystem is raw capitalism. This is an environment in which the companies that have not been able to deliver value, that are not functioning well, that are not efficient, are not going to survive. And that's a good thing. That's how it should be. So, in a system that's traded 24 hours a day, where there are no stop loss triggers and switches that kick in, where you just get the full effect of a free and open market, where people can very easily, with very low switching costs, exit or enter anytime they want, what we're seeing is really market dynamics. And that's a good thing, I think, in the long run.
Yeah, no, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, realistically, we're going to have to drop some of the dead weight at some point with various companies and projects that are in the space. So,
the crypto space. In the broader economy, we're going to still have, plane companies that make planes that don't fly, telecom companies that overcharge for poor broadband connections, healthcare companies that don't offer healthcare. All of those are going to get propped up and will continue to survive in a zombie-like fashion, drawing resources out of our economy because of this very, very misguided approach we have of politicizing market economics. And that's going to be really, really bad for the broader economy, because this saps resources from companies that could potentially compete. But that doesn't happen in crypto. There is no way to monopolize or lock out competition primarily because there isn't the market regulation and market intervention that we're seeing in other industries.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. So, what do you think are some of the main obstacles that are still preventing blockchain technology and Bitcoin technology from being adopted to the mainstream right now? And when we do see that, I mean, ideally, if that happens, which sectors do you think are going to lead the way the most?
So to me, what this technology represents is an open financial system that adds a choice to everybody on the planet, a choice to use a system that is not part of the traditional financial system, that has different characteristics, that is open, borderless, and neutral, that represents a change from the past. And so that choice is now available to a lot of people who didn't have that choice before. And tens of millions of people have already started using that in order to gain some financial independence, empower themselves, gain freedom in some cases, help their families across borders, things like that, things where the traditional financial system doesn't really serve them. So in terms of going mainstream, I don't know what the definition of going mainstream is. The idea that Bitcoin is here to replace national currencies, I think, is a fallacy. From my perspective, the era of a monopolistic currency system where you're born into a currency, that's the currency you use, that's the only currency you can use, died on January 3rd, 2009 with the introduction of Bitcoin. Now we're talking about a world of choice. And so the idea is, now it's a bit like currencies are a bit like the web. You don't like this website, go to that website. You don't have to replace all of your activity. You can use both. And so people are going to use the dollar and Bitcoin, the yen and Bitcoin, or any of the other currencies that are available. That era of choice has already started. In terms of obstacles, the obstacles are the same with any technology. We're still very early in the maturity curve. And the primary obstacle, in my opinion, is the user interfaces. And on the web browser determines the pace at which users can adopt the features that engineers are building, because that's the primary interface. In cryptocurrencies, wallets are like the web browser. They are the primary interface through which users interact with the system. And so the pace of innovation, the pace of adoption is determined at the front end by the development of wallets. Unfortunately, from an infrastructure perspective, wallets are still trying to find ways to monetize their development efforts and maintenance efforts and sustain those efforts. And it's actually very difficult. People are accustomed to getting them for free, and it's very difficult to monetize that process. So we see a lot of churn in that space. It's still very immature. The user interfaces are very clunky. The ease of use is pretty low. It takes a big learning curve to learn how to use these systems, as it was really with early web browsers and the early internet. So from that perspective, it's going to take a while to get to the level of maturity where people can use it with ease, and where the common activities that they do are secure by default and easy to keep secure. And that's just a matter of time. We just have to be patient and watch the development in the space and gradually try to teach people how to use this.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. So given how decentralized Bitcoin is and other cryptocurrencies are, why do you think that we're still, like most of us are still mainly using centralized exchanges? And what are your thoughts on decentralized exchanges?
Well, the reason is really simple. Centralized exchanges offer more liquidity, more ease of use, and they're a familiar experience for people who have spent their entire life dealing with banks. Centralized exchanges are the banks of cryptocurrency, and they offer a familiar metaphor for people with accounts and custodial access. Essentially, you don't control your money, you depend on a third party to control it, and people are accustomed to that. And they only notice that it's a problem when it goes horribly wrong, which it does frequently. I think it's important to realize that it takes a very long time for people to change the way they interact with socially important and deep-seated technologies that have been around for decades or centuries or millennia. When it comes to money, we're talking about a technology that has been around for millennia. We don't even know how old money is, because the way to know that would be to look at written history, and it appears that money is older than writing. Oops. So it's pretty difficult to see how far back it goes, but we know it goes back very, very far. It's one of the proto-technologies of humanity. Now, when you have a radical and disruptive innovation that comes to change a technology that is so deep-seated that if you ask most people out there, is money a technology, they'd be like, no. They wouldn't really know how to handle that question. It is, of course, a technology. It's a symbolic linguistic system for expressing value to each other, which means it's a technological artifact of civilization. But it's so deeply embedded in society that it's invisible to most. And it takes a very long time to change behaviors. I mean, look at what's happening right now. Suddenly, a whole bunch of people are using video conferencing and work from home. This was possible on the internet 15, 20 years ago. I've been working from home for 28 years. And I've been working remotely and using video and collaboration services and remote technology to do that. Suddenly, a whole bunch of other people came to it, and it's as if it's a new thing. It was there, but people were not accustomed to it. It takes a very long time to change society. Sometimes with technologies this deep-seated, it's a generational thing. For everybody who's over 50 or 60 years old today, the idea of money as an internet technology is alien, weird, untrustworthy, and bizarre. To everyone under 40, the idea of money as a product of a government committee of 12 white old dudes is an unworkable, bizarre aspect of boomer mentality. And so these two generational pictures are coming into sharp focus now, and we've got a clash of generations. Everyone who was born after 2009 is growing up in a world where internet money always existed and is perfectly normal. People born after 2000 are growing up in a world where the internet is a big part of their world and has always been so. And so this is a transition that may even take a generation.
Yeah, no, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. I feel like the next generation is always kind of learning things ahead and then teaching the previous generation, and we're always adopting things a lot faster.
Yeah,
So
imagine an economics class happening 20 years from now where a kid is given a project to explain the Federal Reserve in a report, and they're like, I don't understand this. It's like, it's a bit like today we look back and think about, our past and think, okay, so wait, so a whole bunch of slave-owning dudes with white wigs came together to decide how to write a constitution on their own. That's bizarre. And you got this report and they're like, a committee decided how to run the entire economy, and they weren't even elected. They belonged to this independent company that's basically run by banks, but which had some kind of weird mandate from the government to decide how to run the money supply. This makes no sense to me. Why wouldn't you just do it on the internet like we do today? It will truly be a cognitive dissonance issue.
yeah, yeah, no, I absolutely agree with that. I think for a lot of people, it's just such a radical change that we just need that time. So, what are your thoughts on the Bitcoin halving, and like, do you have any concerns, or what are your thoughts on that right now?
I have zero concerns. This will be my third halving, and as always, the time running up to the halving is dominated by Bitcoin obituaries that are being written with great glee about the impending death spiral of this incredible event that is going to be a big bunch of nothing burger. At the end of the day, nothing happens on that day that hasn't been predicted for 10 years. And the types of profitability decisions that go into mining are made on a daily basis every day, and have been made every day for the past 10 years, and dynamically adjust the hash rate accordingly. And this rather ingenious design, we don't give enough credit to Satoshi's adoption of the dynamic difficulty retargeting algorithm, and the dynamic issuance halving every 210,000 blocks. The dynamic of these two algorithms playing against each other is truly genius. And it's led to a system that is extremely robust. So what's going to happen? A lot of volatility, because most people are going to be reacting to emotion and price reflexivity, and then a big nothing. And then once that big nothing settles after a few months and people realize, oh, okay, so what's the prevailing narrative at that time? Bitcoin is still alive. Blocks come out every 10 or so minutes. It may slow down for a bit because of the halving, and then it will bounce right back in a few weeks. And then nothing. And people will look at that and go, oh, it survived. So what is the key characteristic of Bitcoin? Surviving in the face of relentless obituaries being written by people who don't understand how it works. I think that's a great narrative.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. Yeah, we definitely see a huge ramp up of those leading up to the halving. Do you have any thoughts on how this will affect minor capitulations in terms of like if prices stay the same and we see a lot of them stop mining, or like what are your thoughts on that?
So if 50% of the mining capacity turned off tomorrow morning, we'd be back where we were in 2018 in terms of hash rate, which was a perfectly healthy level of security for the Bitcoin system. Blocks will slow down to 20 minutes per block, and 4 weeks later, the system will reset and blocks will go back to 10 minutes through a difficulty retargeting, and the 50% of remaining miners who held on for 4 weeks will find themselves twice as profitable. It's really, really simple. That's how it works. Nothing will change. So the fact that miners may capitulate, here's a more interesting question. Right now, we're seeing an unprecedented drop in world oil prices, which is going to trickle through into prices of retail products that are dependent on oil. We're already seeing gasoline at $1 or less throughout the United States at retail locations. Now, keep in mind, that is going to affect electricity prices. The largest US-based mining concerns are actually based in Texas and in other oil-producing states, where they're using electricity generated from oil as well as off-gassing energy from burning more environmental friendly burning of what is normally just burnt off into the atmosphere from drilling operations. So what we might see is a reorganization of mining in terms of geographic allocation. Right now, there's dominance in China that built up primarily because of the combination of cheap electricity from coal as well as access to hardware. The access to hardware question is no longer an issue because now we're talking about basically the front end of Moore's law. The hardware is not evolving very fast. If you buy a miner today, it's good for 2 years or 3 years, maybe even 4 in terms of profitability. So now your biggest factor has become the cost of underlying energy and the cost of operations. Well, underlying energy costs just plummeted in the West, where oil is a more dominant form of electricity production. It's going to be interesting to see how that plays out, but not really going to be a big effect for Bitcoin. We might see more decentralization in mining.
Yeah, that was actually something that I hadn't really taken into account. So I'm glad you noted that because, yeah, I really just never thought how oil would affect the electricity costs for mining. How do you, are you fully like caught up with everything going on with like the crypto purge on YouTube? Do you have any thoughts on that? Were you affected at all by that? Did you have any strikes or warnings or anything like that?
Every few months, people get all up in arms for a crypto purge, and for the most part, I haven't seen it. I think every now and then, some people fall afoul of the community guidelines on YouTube. Now, this is a problem with centralized platforms. Of course, for people like me who do education for newbies, the solution isn't to go to some kind of decentralized platform because then I lose all of my audience. My audience isn't going to go. It's a chicken and egg problem. I have to get you into crypto before you start being interested in decentralized sources of information. So I need to be on the platforms where the mainstream non-crypto audiences are. And that's a challenging task, and there's a very big risk of platform. But because the work I do is educational, because I don't get into investment advice, because I don't get into telling people to buy or not buy specific coins and things like that, I don't get drawn into endorsements and things like that, I've never had any problem keeping up with the community guidelines. That's not to say that the people who have had platform issues have done something wrong. It's just that I haven't experienced any problems. And, I'm glad. I don't know what is happening with the crypto purge.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, your content is very it's a lot safer compared to a lot of stuff that is getting affected. That makes a lot of sense because yeah, educational content is always a lot it's not going to be as affected because you don't like dive into the political side of things and stuff like
I
that.
dive into the political side very, very much. What I don't do is veer into giving investment advice. And so from that perspective, and I actually, even when I dive into the political side, I try to remain fairly neutral. I don't think this purge has anything to do with politics, honestly.
Okay. Yeah, because I've heard people talk about like it's political and some people think it's like just against cryptocurrency and blockchain. There's a lot of theories, obviously. I am curious
Listen,
though, like
companies like YouTube are fundamentally conservative in their application of community guidelines because they face liability from government agencies and regulators, because if they don't take certain measures, then the government comes in and changes the rules on them, as we've seen with various attempts to change Rule 230 of the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, under the Earn It Act and various other bullshit moves by regulators to break the internet. These companies are fundamentally conservative. They bring this weird corporate morality, which is very, very risk averse and touchy, and responds very, very reactively to brigading of complaints and things like that. That's why, they'll censor nipples from breastfeeding women which they take absurd policies because of things like that. But
Yeah.
it's not guided in a specific political way against a specific group of broadcasters, in my opinion. What they're trying to do is balance this impossible balance between free speech and overactive local governments and regulators who are trying to police speech. And what they come up with is this stupid system that throws out these algorithmic approaches that catch a lot of false positives, if you want to call it that, that just basically sweep up a lot of innocent and perfectly fine speech into the big bucket of things that they censor. They have to censor. They cannot be neutral. The reason for that is because they're centralized. It gives us a lesson about decentralized technology, but I wouldn't draw any political conclusions from that.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I'm sure a lot of people in the crypto space would love to see you on decentralized, like social platforms or decentralized video hosting platforms. But yeah, I guess that makes sense. How you mentioned your audience isn't really there. Would you
My
ever
audience isn't
potentially?
there. Yeah, there's another risk, which is that joining a decentralized platform in its early stages acts as a very powerful endorsement of the specific platform. I'll give you an example. For the past 4 years, people have been constantly bugging me to jump on Steem. Now what? Right? If I had done that and acted aggressively to use a platform like Steem, that would have acted as a very powerful endorsement. Then, when things happen like what recently happened to Steem, where there was effectively a hostile takeover through delegated proof of stake, what do? Now I have to take political positions and take sides and decide, am I moving everything to Hive or staying on Steem or blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
I don't want to play that game. I can't be picking winners and losers. So there's a very big risk of aligning myself with one project, and there's a substantial cost to pushing and publishing my content on multiple platforms. Operationally, it's very expensive for me. I have to fund the whole team. We're giving all of this away for free. I don't make any money from the content. And so having a team have to push content to multiple different platforms and maintain those platforms is very expensive. So I basically can't do that.
I mean, I will say, like, just as an example, Library allows you to like sync all of your YouTube videos automatically, so that you wouldn't have to do anything. I mean, obviously that's just one example, but yeah, I mean that does make sense.
There's a lot more to running an online channel, as you, I'm sure, know. Than simply uploading the content. You have to interact with the community. You have to, manage old content, update descriptions, all of this stuff. Just starting is easy, but then actually maintaining that presence and the quality of that presence over time gets very expensive.
Yeah. So you just don't want to dedicate without fully dedicating to something, and being able to provide your full.
Yeah, and I can't do that with technologies that are not yet mature enough. Keep in mind, I'm running a small startup. I have 9 people working for me at the moment in a cutting edge technology. So I'm already exposing myself to both the risks of a small business startup and the risks of a cutting edge technology in which I'm operating, where my performance is very much dependent on the actions in the market price of things like Bitcoin. You should see all of my statistics correlate perfectly with Bitcoin price. To add another layer of risk with another untested and immature technology on that is just bad business.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So if you were in charge of monetary policy, what would you do differently? Like
Resign.
resign? Fair enough. Or rather, if
Re-
you were put in charge of monetary policy today, what would be the first thing you would do?
Oh boy, it's such a big ball of yarn. Like the
Yeah.
systems are so complex and interconnected that you can't really affect policy in one place and not expect it to simply displace the problem to another part of the system. So you can't just deal with monetary policy on its own without dealing with the entire structure of governance and regulation, government democracy, constitutional issues, and everything else that interacts with that. I would certainly not be doing the kind of kleptocracy level wealth transfer that is happening at the moment, where this is being used as an opportunity to ram through the largest historically bailout and wealth transfer in the history of the world, across every nation simultaneously, with very few controls and strings attached. And essentially, this is a transfer from the future of the lower and middle classes, robbing them in order to pay off the richest and largest multinational corporations. And it's disgusting. A lot of people tell me, my position has been no bailouts, and a lot of people are like, but what will happen to the workers? Bail out the fucking workers. Shareholders should sink and lose their investment on this. If you have not anticipated risks like this that have been discussed for decades as critical systemic risks of pandemics and political risks and things like that, then you're not running your business properly. And if you make decisions like that, your investors should suffer. That if you make an investment, you should accept the risk that comes from that investment, and part of that risk is losing your money. And in order to prevent investors from losing their money, we're basically robbing the workers, we're robbing the lower and middle class, and enriching investors. The Cantillon effect is really, really strong right now. This is the effect of where these types of transfers of wealth move absolutely into the pockets of the richest of the rich, because they have the means, the lawyers, the accountants, the influence to direct those resources in their direction. And this is going to massively exacerbate income inequality and power inequality in our system. And it's already at neo-feudalist levels. It's ridiculous. This experiment does not end well.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. So I have another quick question. What is the most asked question for you around Bitcoin and blockchain?
Oh boy. It kind of depends on the time of year. It depends on the sector. It depends on the geography where I am when that's asked. It depends on the audience I'm talking to. It ranges all over the place. Probably the most
I was just going to say, to narrow it down, do you have a favorite question that you like to answer?
How do I do this? And so that's the question that I like being asked the most, because I think my answer is different from most other people. People ask me, how do you buy Bitcoin? How do I buy Bitcoin? When should I buy Bitcoin? And my answer is really simple. Don't buy it, earn it. Convert your labor, your services, your products, your skills, your passion into something that you exchange for Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies, but primarily Bitcoin, instead of or as well as national currencies. Start selling your services. And this is for two reasons. One, because you have much greater privacy and you don't need to worry about timing and opportunity costs when you're earning instead of buying. Secondly is because it It means that you are actively entering the crypto economy as a participant, not simply being exposed to the price fluctuation as an investor. And thirdly, because in the process of entering the crypto economy, you are also exiting your labor from the traditional financial system. That is a fundamental change in perspective. When you start earning Bitcoin, you look at it very, very differently from when you buy it, because we don't buy our dollars or our Canadian currency when we live in that country. We earn it. And that relationship where you start looking at capital as a product of your labor, your ingenuity, your innovation, your risk-taking, changes the way you look at that capital.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I've always said I think the best way to get people in and not as worried about, all the different security issues and how do they do this and how do they, I think that earning it kind of takes away a lot of that stress, and that's what's going to get people in and actually start playing around and learning about it before, and then maybe they'll actually get into investing in other things. But I think the easiest way to get them started is definitely without asking them to put money into it.
Yeah.
So I have a few fun questions now. What fictional universe would you choose to live in if you could choose any, and why?
Star Trek, without a doubt.
Awesome.
I'm a kid of the Star Trek Next Generation, Jean-Luc Picard, and Star Trek presented us with a kind of futuristic society, but one that was based on technocratic, meritocratic, logical, reasoned, empathetic governance that was rationality and enlightenment-based principles. And, we are about as far away as possible from that society in many ways across the globe. And if anything, in some ways, we're moving away from that. But yeah, that's the universe I would want to live in. Ironically,
Awesome.
or perhaps in a prescient way, Star Trek doesn't have money. You may not notice that at first, but it makes sense. The Star Trek universe is one of abundance rather than scarcity. And as a
Hmm.
result, leisure is what's valued, and arts and things like that. And so money is unnecessary if you can, make food in a replicator and fulfill all of the lower levels of the Maslow hierarchy. You can really focus on self-actualization, and that's the currency of Star Trek is self-actualization. I don't know if that's feasible. That may be a utopian dream, and it also depends on the physics of energy. But it's a very interesting perspective of how society might work in a post-scarcity environment.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I think that's an awesome choice. So, what was it like running a pirate radio station? Because I remember in one of your previous interviews that you had started I believe it was a rock channel, because you only had a few channels at the time. Do you want to share a little bit about that?
Yeah, so when I was 15 years old, we only had 4 or 5 radio stations on the dial, on the FM dial. 3 of them were the armed forces, so Army radio, Navy radio, Air Force radio, public radio, playing basically folk and nationalistic music, bands and parade music and all kinds of stuff like that. It's a leftover of the dictatorship that happened in Greece in the 70s. So, here's the mid-'80s, and I'm a teenager, and I'm in a boys' school, and I have hobbies like computers and electronics and music. And so honestly, it was a very simple equation. How can I turn my hobbies into opportunities to meet girls? Very, very silly motivation, but the end result was I was able to pour my passion for music, combine it with my passion for electronics, learn a hell of a lot of physics. We built the radio station equipment by hand, like everything
Wow.
from building the transmitters and learning the basic physics of electromagnetic radiation and how to build systems, all the way to building the antenna by hand from metal rods and tuning it by hand. And we arrived at a very popular radio station. And it was really funny because we'd start transmitting at the beginning of our show at 100 megahertz, for example. And over the evening, we'd roll down the FM dial because as the transmitter got hot, because it was a purely analog hand-tuned transmitter, the frequency would shift. So people had to follow us on the dial as we drifted. It was really funny. But yeah, it was a great experience. And we eventually included a lot of other DJs to play a very broad variety of music. You know, playing heavy metal on the FM radio band in Greece in the mid-'80s was like revolutionary. A lot of people did not like it, but nobody else was doing that. So it was a great experience. It was also a great experience in running a business and having partners and running finances effectively. It was my first startup at 15 and a half, 16 years old.
Wow. Yeah. Most people cannot say the same. So that, I think that's really, really awesome that you did that, and at such a young age. I mean, I had no idea that you actually built all the equipment. I think that's incredible. So we're 45 minutes in. I said I wouldn't take any more time than that. So just before we end off, is there any books that you would recommend for people to check out if they'd like to learn about blockchain and Bitcoin?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you want to understand it from a technical perspective, if you're technically minded, my book, Mastering Bitcoin, is a book that explains the technology behind Bitcoin, how it works, the innards, if you like. The first 3 chapters are accessible to, the first 2 chapters are very accessible to your average reader without any technical expertise. If you have a bit of a technical mind, you can easily wade through the rest and pick up as much as you want. It's available for free. It's available online. You can also buy it on Amazon, of course, but it's an open source book. It's been translated into dozens of languages. Yeah, you can start with that. If, on the other hand, you're not technically minded and you want to understand a bit more about the philosophy, the economics, the sociology, the impact on the future, and this kind of broad vision of this technology, I've written a series of books called The Internet of Money. Volume 3, which I happen to have right here, was published in December. These are collections of my talks that I've done at conferences. And they give you a broad view of why this technology matters rather than simply how it works.
Awesome. Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on and doing this. I'm sure people will appreciate it and get a better idea of who is the man behind the screen. So again, thank you so much for doing this.
It's a pleasure, Scott. Thank you.
Awesome. All right. Cheers.